I retitled my piece, the lecture today, National Security and Privacy in a Datafied World. But I'm expecting a lot of you people here probably are studying this yourself and probably are well up on some of the details of this tensions that's occurring between the government and rights of privacy. So I will simply say I am off the record. Actually, I could be on the record because I'm not employed by anybody. I don't have any portfolio from any agency, so what I say really matters little. And you'll realize that how long ago it was that I started out at the NSA and then went to the NSC. You realize how long ago that was, that no matter what I said probably relates very little to what's going on today. I mean, I have a briefcase. Now, if anybody remembers what a briefcase is, that'll give you an idea of what you're dealing with here. So Katie gave me a great introduction. Watergate was a situation where I began in this area, just out of Georgetown, but I had experience in the military, and I was the engineer also in telecommunications. It was where the intelligence agencies may or may not have been involved in some domestic operations, which is really the purview of the FBI. And so there was a great deal of defense on behalf of all the agencies, including the NSA. And the lawyers, NSA was an operating agency. I mean, it did things. It didn't really come under a lot of people's umbrellas. And it didn't have lawyers that had to deal with things like constitutional issues or purview of rights and authorities. Mainly it had contract lawyers and things like that for housekeeping, ash and trash and things like that. What's going on here with all of a sudden they're in the limelight. I was hired there, not in the general counsel's office, but outside and by a group, and asked me to say, everything we do now, we go to the general counsel and the general counsel says, don't do it. We're hiring you to figure out how we can do something. And that's how I got started. A year later, I was at the NSC, and I guess I was there for another 4 years, I guess, before I left. But that's a long time ago, mid-70s. All right, conduct of the lecture is anybody that wants to ask questions at any time. I'm principally, I'm not going to tell you a bunch of war stories, so I'll sprinkle them in, but I'm trying to go through here and give a frame of reference for this conflict or this tension between national security, what NSA is going through and all the monitoring and the right to privacy. So without further ado, let me ask a question here. Is anybody familiar with the Wired magazine at all? Probably. Well, they have a chart here where they have figured out the Americans who still have privacy. So I'd like a show of hands if anybody fits into these particular categories. Illiterate, Mennonite, agoraphobes. Anybody? I knew there'd be one like this in the class. Okay, not that. Okay, how about feral children? Feral children? No. Last, dead people. Anybody here dead? Okay, those are the people who still have privacy, according to the survey, the chart. I guess that is true, but I guess it depends on what people mean by privacy. So the starting point for my talk is going to be all the way back to the beginning when we were running around in the aboriginal fields, and we all, humans, Homo sapiens, have all decided or have all followed a history of forming groups. They have formed groups, and in forming the groups, the individuals have to give up rights to make the group work. Why do they form groups? Why don't they just say, we're just going to be all on our own and have a good time? But what happens is it's chaos. And they form groups so that they can provide some order out of the chaos. But one of the main reasons they form groups is because other people form groups. So they form the group for defense, self-defense. They preserve the group. And in order to do that, they had to give up some rights. The question is, there's tensions when this occurs. Individuals like to go across the street and get their possessions back and kill the guy next door, but the group says you can't do that. You've got to go through process. So there's tensions in this. You've got to give up some of your rights. And the question is this tension real? Is this tension something that continues throughout history? And the answer seems to be yes. And in this particular issue between national security and privacy. There are organizations that discuss this, learned organizations such as IWP, who have debated this since the Snowden revelations. And one of the groups is the Aspen Conference on Security, and it occurred about a month ago in Aspen, Colorado. I have some association with Aspen, so I was able to get something from their newspaper. And the issue here, that was most attractive to me, was that there was the media out there, along with Keith Alexander, or Alexander from NSA and everything, and they were discussing privacy. And one of the issues that came up is this tension between the media and the government a healthy thing? And indeed, this particular article cites what the conference debated was Crowley, P.J. Crowley, Obama's former Assistant Secretary of State for Public Affairs, said at this meeting, he said, there's always going to be tension between the government and the media, and there should be tension. There should be tension on this issue. So that is, I guess, a starting point for what I want to jump into about the national security versus privacy. Now, when you're going to abridge the rights of the citizens, when you're going to take some rights to form the group, what rights are going to be taken and how are they going to be taken? Well, we can go back in history. What are the earliest groups? Clans, blood rights. Whoever was the leader of the clan decided that's going to be the rule. And if there's any dispute about individuals not liking the way they did things in a group, they can get out of the group or there'd be force brought upon them. I guess the next iteration was religion. God said so. God says you have to live this way, you have to do these things to be part of this group. And that is the rule. But later on, an interesting thing happened. The common man, which is part of all these groups, always is restless, always is looking for a better thing, always looking for something that's considered like justice. So what the common man has done as we've evolved through these groups is we've brought up ideologies. Communism, capitalism, socialism. These are the ideologies that have led the large groups over the last century or so. And in doing so, they have decided, how do we balance the rights of the individual versus the rights of the group? And they've formed structures and procedures by which to do this. So that gets us to the crux of this talk, which you might have wondered where the hell we're going with this. All right. And what this means is the tensions in the group are decided in certain ways. So how are they decided? Well, let me see. We've got another thing here. No, that's something that comes a little bit later. In this system of government we have here, let me see. Yes, what rights? Okay. In this particular dispute, what rights do the individuals say they have, and what rights do the groups say they have? The group says it has a right to defend the country, national security, and so on. Individuals say we have a right to privacy. Let's examine those rights. The groups claim that they're defending the country. They need to do these kinds of activities: surveillance, intercepts, listening in, to prevent harm to the group, harm to the nation. They cite the Constitution. It's certainly in there. Article 2, Section 2. Executive has the right to form armies and defend the nation. They also have the FISA, Federal Intelligence Surveillance Act, 1978. That is a Congress-made act that placed executive surveillance activities, it authorized them more explicitly than the Constitution did. But one of the things that was significant that it did, it provided judicial oversight to what the executive does. And in this particular case nowadays, FISA is the one that oversees NSA activities. That if NSA says they want to do something, they submit it to FISA. That court, it's made up, the act created a judicial court to review the NSA activities and approve them or not. So that exists today. So that's one thing that's significant, because politically, the NSA is just not going off acting like acting on behalf of only the president. It's submitting what it wants to do to the court, a judicial branch, and it's getting approval to do that. Okay, and Patriot Act. is another thing in the quiver that expanded and defined the role since to the 9/11 attacks. It defined the role more of what the government was authorized to do, what the executive was authorized to do. That was an act made by the Congress which makes the laws, which expanded the powers. Why did it do that? It did that because the political atmosphere was we wanted the powers. We would take any steps necessary to prevent another thing like 9/11 from happening. So that Patriot Act gave more powers to the executive. Let me see. Okay, so what happens when these activities occur, when NSA is being reported doing all these things in the name of surveillance and defense, they immediately cite, look, we are the most regulated intelligence agency in the world. But they not only cite the fact that the executive branch wants to do this, but they cite the fact that they're cleared by the Justice Department too. And it's the same thing in this conference in Aspen. It was disclosed. This is Johnson, who's the Defense Department, DoD General Counsel. He says, we are the most over-regulated agency. We are cleared in our actions, meaning the NSA actions to do these programs, by the legislative branch, regulated by the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act court. There's no exception. There's no exception to what we'd have to do is being approved. Well, let me continue on here, and let's get into a little bit, before we go too far, how this activity works, how these things work. And I want to emphasize these are open source, Wall Street Journal. It's a diagram. I don't have any audio video. It'd be nice if I did. But I can explain it's pretty relatively simple. There's sort of two areas of interest. Maybe three, but it's not very much. First area of interest is phone calls. The phone calls. How do they get the phone calls? They don't just listen in. They go. They submit to this FISA court. Here's what we want to do. For example, it's been quoted in the press. They want to take all the phone calls in the San Francisco area for 1 month. All of them. I mean, they just want to take the data. And they're going to store this electronically. All the phone calls. They go to the FISA court. The FISA court says approved. They go to the telephone company. They say, here's the court order. Give us this. They can get that order from the FISA court. The telephone company complies. The standard procedure is telephone companies don't want anything to do with this. This is all the political stuff, government stuff, NSA stuff. We are instruments only, and we have no standing. We don't say anything about that. And that is the way it's conducted. That is on the phone calls. And it says here the NSA gathers phone call data. What's metadata? Metadata is like existence data. Who called? When did they call? Not what they said, but how long did the call last? And this is recorded. That is secured, tabulated, and stored. All right. The PRISM program. They act according to these sources. They not only get the headers, who's it going to, from, and everything else, but they get the contents. And they're able to, in that program, record and store that data. One of the things that makes this possible is the development of the computer and the machines that take vast amounts of these supercomputers, vast amounts of information, and they can store them. And they can store them under identified tabs or whatever, I don't know, but at any rate, they can store these things in warehouses full of computers that will do this. The thing is now it's possible. I mean, I don't know it's possible, but I would assume that you can record and store everything that's being said almost anywhere. You've got the capability to do that. The question would be later on to see if it's what you really do. But at any rate, that's how the telephone thing works, how the PRISM thing works. It goes into big computers, and what happens then is they examine these metadata or the PRISM. What's in there that might be threatening to the U.S.? Well, we got a guy named Osama bin Laden. He was talking to somebody in Portland, Oregon for 10 minutes the other day. Think there might be something in there? Now, if there's something in there, they can't break that communication unless there's a probable cause that a crime is being committed. They got the information that this was able to be was of interest because of the headers. But now that guy's a known terrorist, right? Osama bin Laden, right? So there might be something in there. They can go to the FISA court. We need probable cause that a crime might be committed. And they say, okay. So they then interrogate the contents, and they see what they say. And that is a determination that they make, because that's the way they protect the U.S. On the PRISM data, they've got the headers, and they also have the contents. So they're able to search all these massive communications. What do you search for? How about Boston? Let's forget Boston. How about somebody went to the Caucasus? How about black powder, buying a lot of it over time? How about pressure cookers? Gee, there may be a correlation here. How about these fertilizers? They're able to be put together with some kind of black powders. Maybe there's a correlation. So that's when they start actually looking and getting it more and more involved, and that's the way they do it. And I must say, everyone might bitch about privacy. 10 years since 9/11. Nothing's really come up. Nothing's really happened. Of course, we did get the Boston thing. Anyway, all right. So that's what the group, the government says. That's how they claim to work their programs and why they can do them. What do the individuals say? We all get spied on, our messages are all stored. We say Fourth Amendment. Fourth Amendment. I don't know if everybody's familiar with it, but what it says is the right of the people to be secure in their persons. I guess I've got a copy here. Yes, the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects. Maybe an email is a paper. Maybe a telephone call is an effect. Shall not be violated, except for probable cause. And that goes back to some of the stories I've just told about. You can't violate that, but that comes out of the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution. There are no laws on the books specifically addressing privacy. There are laws that might be interpreted to mean that, but the courts have been not good in protecting individuals' privacy. So there's this tension I spoke about at the beginning. The government and the individual, national security and privacy. How is this tension resolved in this system? Well, God doesn't rule us at all, and nobody's a clan in charge of us, and if anybody saw the Tudors, we're not subject to getting our head chopped off. But we do have 3 branches of government set up by the Founding Fathers in the Constitution. The role of the executive. The laws get passed, the Constitution gets written, the executive executes the laws. The executive doesn't decide the laws. The executive lobby for the laws, but he doesn't decide the laws. Congress has to make it. And the executive doesn't balance the interest between national security and privacy. Because he can't do it. It's not his job. So when Alexander gets up and says, I am a big advocate of privacy, it's an opinion. It's not his job. His job is to do what the Congress passed the law and to tell him to do. So that's the executive branch. We can't find in the executive branch a resolution of this tension. Okay, so we'll go to the judicial branch, which does what? It interprets the laws. Interprets the laws. What does this law mean? If a guy says, I don't want to be listened to, and he says it's violating my privacy, well, what does it mean? So they go to the law books, and first, remember I told you, there's no law specifically talking about privacy. And that's a problem with, and so you say, well, let's make one. Well, that's a problem with what in the hell is privacy? This is the Harvard Law Journal in this year, 2013 spring. Privacy, Security, and Human Dignity in the Digital Age. And it was a wealth of information for me to present this and presenting this lecture. First of all, let me read this little piece here, very short, about privacy. Privacy has long been a conceptual jungle, a concept in disarray. The attempt to locate the essential core properties of privacy has led to failure. Usually, it's really ceased to be helpful as a term to guide policy, because privacy means so many different things to so many different people. So, a constantly morphing notion that evolves as societal attitudes adjust to new cultural and technological realities. So there hasn't been a law made on privacy, and you can't go to the judicial branch and say, well, I got a right of privacy. They don't know what that means. They don't accord that what it means. Problem of definition. So actually, they said privacy is no good. How about let's try this? Creepiness. Let's see if we can put creepiness in there and make that work. You can all read it here, right? Anytime you want to see, you can get these sites. It didn't work either. And then one of the reasons is social is a changing social and networking norms. I mean, the title of one of these articles in here is very prescient, I think. The pursuit of privacy in a world where information control is failing. I mean, you can't, that's the thing. And I don't know how many of you had kids, but they put everything on that thing. They dump data out into Facebook and everything else, especially boys and girls. So the problem is, what's private? I mean, you've disclosed it to the world. Now don't come in and tell us about it. Anyway. Okay, so the conclusion in this article is a grim legal basis for defining privacy. But the rights to privacy, they'll acknowledge that anyway. Then they have Fourth Amendment and probable cause. Here's the problem with that. Remember what the Fourth Amendment said? Everybody's got a right to be secure except for probable cause. All right. I want to read this short passage to you about how probable cause has come to be interpreted in the case of electronic communications, or in the case of any communications. Let me start with a simple example. The letter. That was 50 years ago. It had the mail service. You'd put an address on the outside of the envelope. Give it to the mailman. Everybody sees it. Everybody sees it. Everybody knows you mailed it. Everybody knows when they mailed it. That's sort of like metadata. You don't have any control over that. I mean, you be having up a conversation with, somebody at a criminal syndicate. They can read that thing. They can't necessarily read the contents. Okay. All right. This is an article from NPR, and it talks about this. It says the code and other legal analysis say the world of computers has weakened the Fourth Amendment. Okay, it's true. Here's why. Let's say the police. This is good. This is good. Here's why. Let's say the police or FBI wanted to gather intimate details about your life back in the good old days. That means before computers. Whom are you meeting? What are you reading? What are you writing in your diary? What kind of products have you been buying? Where are you going to travel and where are you going to stay? One of the best ways to get that was to bug your house, wiretap your phone. Based on the Fourth Amendment, that meant the police would have to break into your house. They'd need a search warrant. They have to have a search warrant because they're going into your papers in effect and looking at them. And to obtain a warrant, the law officers had to convince a judge that they had probable cause that the place they wanted to search or the person they wanted to bug was likely to have evidence of a crime. All right, but since 1960s and 70s, the Supreme Court and other courts have issued rulings declaring that the government does not need a search warrant to obtain your personal documents you've already shared with somebody else. For instance, since you allow your bank and credit card companies to know what you buy, you let your phone company know whom you call, you can't claim that information is private, you gave it to third parties. It's a legal version of the lesson you learned when you're 12 years old. If you want the secret, 3 people could keep a secret if 2 of them are dead. In the wake of those decisions, the digital revolution came along, and that's what we have here. So what do we have here? We have a case. Wait a minute, where's the point about subpoena? Hold on. Subpoena, yes. Here's the second thing you have to know about this. Subpoena is nothing more than a request from a judicial officer, not necessarily a judge, that you'd like to gain evidence to see if a crime's been committed, or if a probable cause of crimes. You're looking for information that maybe it's committed. You haven't actually gone to a judge and said a crime, reasonable expectation of crimes being committed, so I have to search these records. This is just looking for information, like laying around, like if you got the guy's letters, you could read the envelope. In fact, what do you got here? You got his metadata. You got his metadata, or her metadata. Instead of a search warrant for police might just need a subpoena, which is trivially easy to issue. The Center for Democracy says, law enforcement doesn't need a judge's approval to save subpoenas. Prosecutors can sign them on their own and can authorize employees of federal and state agencies. Law enforcement agents don't need evidence that there's likely a crime. They need only to be able to show that the records they want are relevant to an investigation. Well, there's all your SHIT is sitting on those computers. And all they have to say is, well, here's how this guy mentioned this word, mentioned that word, or here's a guy that's communicating with Osama bin Laden. Seems like there might be a crime being committed. Give us the warrant. Now you can go break into the communications and you can listen to the communications. Okay. All right.
You have to go to a judge. You're right to write an administrative subpoena to be able to get metadata. But to actually listen
Well, okay. But I agree. Once you get the information gathered by the subpoena, you go to the judge and you say, here's the reason we believe a crime might be committed. FISA judge. And, okay, then you can break into the communication. That's all right. That's why the FISA court is there, to make these determinations, because they don't want to clear the judges, as you probably know. They don't want to clear everybody in the court. They just want to clear certain judges that are able to look at classified information they're getting. Okay. So that is the path, and the law permits it. The law permits it. So that's how they access a lot of these things. Well, what would you do if you say that somebody was communicating with some terrorists in Sudan or someplace like that? You'd say, gee, this guy is talking about this. He's talking about it relatively frequently, and the other people, human resources, are telling us there's a lot of activity going on passports, and that's how they decide to look at these things. And God bless them. All right, hang on. We'll get more to this, though. That's irrelevant to a crime. Okay. The Patriot Act, metadata, existence, and justice, time, duration. I did that. One of the things, top secret rules that allow NSA to say, what is this about? Oh, this is the existence of metadata. These are documents that say that all the information is being recorded, data is kept potentially 5 years. Access to the content, that is, the puncture, as we were just discussing, it takes the place of phone numbers to establish targets are located, whatever. And this came from The Guardian. This came from New details show broader NSA surveillance reach. Much of the information is what they say is discarded, meaning that some communications between Americans are stored in the databases. So anyway, it's enough to get people concerned. And so something else has happened. So we've got that issue. The next issue we have with all the access to all this information that everybody's talking about, we have the rise of big data. Big data allows us to analyze massive quantities of information, not just some, and figure out, is there correlations here? I mean, is there profiles being built? I mean, do we know there's suspects in, Livermore, California, Livermore, Indiana, Chicago. Anyway, in a particular city, Podunk, we know that there's sort of a cell. We don't have any good information, but we've got communications. We've got communications going on more rapidly over the last month with this cell. And so that is a case where you can correlate the big data and may lead you to some other leads that's going to prevent things from happening. But it also big data provides an opportunity to do other things on humans. This is Foreign Affairs magazine, right? The rise of big data, okay? So what does it mean? Well, let me just read a couple things here. My good old open sources here. I'm not going to read too much. I'll just tell you about it. There's a guy in Japan who studies people's butts. And the reason he studies people's butts is because it tells you who the people are. He had done the research here using big data, Kozemuzi or something, and he placed sensors in a car seat to measure 360 different points on a scale of 0 to 256. The result was a digital code that is unique to each individual. In a trial, the system was able to distinguish among a handful of people with 98% accuracy. Now that's one thing you can detect. And so what's the commercial value of this is perhaps in cars. If you are driving recklessly, if you're falling asleep, whatever, these things may be able to sense this from the seat, alert you, prevent the accident. What else can you do with IBM, for example, has a patent for securing premises using surface-based computing technology. What that means, measuring things on the floor. So obviously you say, well, the commercial aspects could be somebody fell down and didn't get up, so you have to alert police. The other thing you can do is you can measure footprints. You can measure footprints. After so many footprints, you can identify a person. And if you have the data, this big data, that you can see if that person's overweight for his carriage or was carrying something or what like that. Big data involves a lot of different leads based on massive data. And We got massive data. We got massive data. So this is what I'm saying is big data can be manipulated to also detect issues within the database. All right. Now, capture, tabulate, store everything. Right here it says. This is another article. Big data analytics, big data's new buzzwords. And here, this article is written by engineers in Information Week, and it essentially says, in order to make decisions with big data, capture as much data as you can, store everything. We're taking care of that. All right, so these are the issues I'm trying to bring up. These are the Fourth Amendment versus the laws and versus the national security rights and so on. This is the conflict. Now, what are the factors in this conflict? What we're trying to do here is figure out whether the balance is correct between privacy and national security. Should there be something else? I mean, there's bitches. People don't like some of this, and the other guys on the other side don't like it either. So what is it? What are these factors that they don't like? Well, creepiness factor, throw that one out the window. Okay, I won't mention this one. This is Petraeus. Okay, do that. Big data algorithms requiring all that stuff to be data. Okay, this is Information Week. We had that. Oh, that's right. Okay, here's what they say. So they say, we collect all this data. We look through it to see if we can find any patterns that show there's a threat to the US. But in addition, the commercial business world collects big data. And they can tell the products you're buying, the movies you go to see, what your tastes and desires are, things like that. And they can market to you. Here's the issue. Here's the issue. Google, Facebook, Amazon. They're commercial interests. They're doing this big data analysis and the data, I mean, your information from your credit cards, your bank accounts, the things that you do. They take that and figure out what kind of a person could be sold, I don't know, charcoal briquettes or whatever. It's for commercial purposes. So there's a quote from an article here, and this is something that weighs into the balance. Google, neither Google, Facebook, Amazon, or other commercial interests have the power to detain, prosecute, and imprison. If the government's listening, they have that power. So do we want them to be able to listen to all the stuff we do? Okay. One of the things that goes into the balance. Analog to electronic surveillance is another thing. Traffic cams. There's a thing about humans, and that is they're not perfect. Speed limit's 45, speed limit's 55. What's everybody driving? 65, 70. They're just moving along, you know? So Maryland has traffic cams. Traffic cams, they're going to electronically determine how fast you're going. So they put them in, and everybody said, we can't live with this. In fact, there's precedent for this. In Maryland, there's been several instances where the police, the state police, have wanted, there's some problem with the union. They wanted either more money, or there was grievance treatments, or whatever it was. So they were not going to give in to the union. The union said, we're going to work the rule. And what was working the rule? 55, 55. They were stopping people left and right because 55, you were going 56. And pretty soon, that was because humans are that way. It's, you know, you make rules, that's what your goal is, not necessarily how you really live. Anyway, when the traffic cams came out in Maryland, there was objection. One of the legislators got on the radio, I remember. We have set these things 12 miles per hour above the posted speed limits, so just everybody relax. So everybody said, okay. But there you are. You see, the laws have got to change to adapt to new conditions, and in this case, they're going to have to change too, because the analog surveillance, in addition to the telephone intercepts and everything, is coming along. There's an article here about lying, one of my favorite topics as a lawyer. It's 2 years old, came from The Economist, and let me read this. And this is the truth. I mean, we have two boys, and they both went to military schools where you always tell the truth. And I thought, geez, you know, they're soon going to learn, you know, that's not really, that's the stated goal, but whether they do that or not is something else. Here's the bottom line. This is The Economist magazine writing about the terrible truth. Technology can see what people are thinking. And by the way, they're not talking about people who are thinking, well, you know, this quadratic equation is going to give me the parameters of the Earth. That's not that. It's the kind of thing like they can read the mind from your facial gestures, from your iris. They can read that. So they can say to you, have you ever seen this person? And if you, it's pretty hard to have your body physiologically not react to something if you've seen the person, or if you've heard the name, or if you know anything about that. It's pretty hard to lie through that, like the polygraph tests. People can lie through those because they can psychologically vary the tempo of their body. But this is harder. This is facial recognition. This is hard to do. But anyway, this is 2 years ago. They're coming up with machines that can tell if you lie. And lying is at the heart of civilization. Lying is the things that makes the world go round. They give examples, very straightforward. Occasional untruth makes domestic life possible. Of course you don't look fat in that clothes. Makes domestic life go around. It's essential for the office. Don't worry, everybody's behind you on this one. Parenting. It didn't matter that you forgot your words, your costume fell off. You were wonderful. So all those are little lies that makes things go along easier. Politics, for example. The Prime Minister has my full support. Really means if that jerk persists in this course of conduct, we'll all be out on our ears. So that's what everybody knows this. And everybody, is it the individual's responsibility to understand this double talk? I think it is, because we all lie. A scary prospect is that the effect mind reading would have on relations between the state and the individual. Okay. So another thing that technology is overcoming, and the question is, how is that balance doing between the group and the individual? All right, effect on the nation-state commerce. This is more down to the electronic surveillance we've been talking with. Effect on the nation-state commerce. Another article by The Economist magazine. They've gone through what seems to be the reaction to everything that's been going on and the concerns that individuals have about their privacy. Here's a quote. Washington's lost sight of the fact that the true source of American cyber power is neither the NSA and its code-breaking nor the offensive capabilities that produce Stuxnet. It is the successful firms which dominate cyberspace and help disseminate American culture and values worldwide, the Googles and the Facebook and the Apples and so on. By tarnishing the reputations, because these firms and PRISM and other things have been implicated in lending the NSA the codes that they could read things. By tarnishing the reputations of these firms, America's national security apparatus has scored its own goal, which I guess in English, in British speak, means shot itself in the foot. It's a thought. It's a thought. And there's some more thoughts on that. Let's see. That's one. Oh, yes. Foreign affairs again. Hypocrisy. Hypocrisy. The end of hypocrisy, right? The end of hypocrisy. Why is that important? American foreign policy in the age of leaks. And the problem this article talks about, it undermines Washington's ability to act hypocritically. I mean, everybody does it. And we did it. This article saying it, okay? Secrecy can be defended as a policy in a democracy, but blatant hypocrisy is a tougher sell. Voters accept that they cannot know everything that their government's doing, but they do not like being lied to. If the United States is to reduce its dangerous dependence on doublespeak, it'll have to submit to real oversight in an open democratic debate about its policies. The era of easy hypocrisy is over. I read this to bring us all back. This is a legitimate tension. It's a tension, it's a political tension, and it's going to be, we're going to see it debated on all sides. All right, let me see. Further evidence of this thing with the this has more with they tapped Merkel's phone and everything, and guess what? They found out Merkel was tapping our phones. That's all true. That's all true. But it seems like the European governments are making an issue. They're not sitting still. They're making an issue on this thing. And what's happening now? NSA fallout hits AT&T's ambitions in Europe. What does AT&T want to do? It's a field that I'm relatively familiar with. AT&T wants to buy Vodafone. AT&T wants to buy Vodafone. The Europeans are saying, oh, wait a minute. After all you've been doing and doing, we're going to push back on this. We're going to have a long and serious review before we allow you to do this. So that's a problem. It interferes with commerce. And the next one I have here. Here's one. Yeah. Just last week, the U.S. came out and criticized Berlin's economic policy. Berlin pushed back. Outraged. We say we're outraged. This is just a distraction because of you guys, you know, being caught with a hand in the cookie jar. So I mean, this complicates things. And the last one here. Not that. I haven't got it. It's too soon. Too soon. Okay. Domestic Commerce LL. That's it right here. Okay. This just says NSA is able to foil basic safeguards of privacy on the web. So, okay. Everybody gets excited about that. And the next article says, tech firms race to encrypt more data after NSA leak. Is that what NSA wanted? Maybe not. All right. Effect on citizens' trust, the last thing. First was the commerce. Am I running over time? Okay, all right. First was state, nation-state commerce. The next thing is the citizens' trust. And the citizens' trust, Dianne Feinstein wrote an article about, look, this is only about a week ago. Look, we've saved you from a lot of damaging terrorism attacks. She's the chairman of the Senate Foreign Intelligence Committee or something like that. She's got responsibility. She's a front person in the Congress on these activities, and she's got to carry the weight for the government. And she does. And she wrote an article saying we're lucky to have these things. So what were the comments that came back? Right, just like the NSA would have cut the Sarnoff brothers, but didn't. If hard-pressed to do anything with all that data, just turn it over to the IRS for the 2014 elections. I'm sure your party and their buds and the taxpayer, good use of the taxpayer-funded information. The heck with privacy. How about this one? I don't buy what the senator's saying. None of this is good for America. Come on. Resist the party line and the IRS or SEC or some other branch of the government will show up and take your personal liberties you thought you had, but now they think they own. The point is, politics isn't what the facts are. It's what people think. And the people, for example, if this was all able to be contained and it wasn't invading privacy, and people like this guy here, he got his, on NSA, a love interest. Yeah, the NSA analyst went off and looked up some, you know, just snooping. And then the IRS sort of audited all the Tea Party things or something. So all that stuff, how do they do that? Well, they do that with big data. They do that by the phones. They do that by these intercept records, not necessarily from NSA. Could be from the IRS, gets them on their own. But they're able to do these things because of the internet and because of the technology. And the rank and file citizen doesn't like that. He's saying, you know, you're going to screw it. Now, what the hell is this one guy saying in here? It's a good one. Yeah. The NSA already shares intelligence with DEA and ATF, so criminals, quote unquote, can be arrested, or whoever they think was a criminal this week anyway. Soon it's going to be the IRS. Oh, Mr. Smith, we happen to know that these prescription deductions are for Viagra. We're going to remove them. After that, who knows? Maybe the EPA to check on your barbecue. Maybe they'll send your information to the highest bidder, suppress your vote. I mean, it's not a good thing. I mean, the question is this gathering political mass? And I think it has gathered some political mass. And the other question here is, you can't draw, I can't draw, and I'm not trying to draw. What I'm trying to show is the process of this government and this nation has 3 branches of government, and they're all going to have to be involved in balancing this thing out. The main big balance is going to be the legislative branch, and I hope they do something about that. Balance it out, because the laws are out of date. They could just fix the laws, maybe. All right, surveillance program criminal case. Oh yes. Well, this was something. They used the NSA data for a criminal case, which they're supposedly doing foreign intelligence, but this was a domestic criminal case involving foreign intelligence, so they did it. But it's going to be a constitutional challenge in that. Let me get back to the thing here. We've gone through the judicial branch. The laws are not clear. We've gone through the executive branch. They've got their marching orders. They're waiting to hear what to do. The legislative branch is the people who should really decide these things. We elect them. They know what our culture is. They know what the technology is. They're aware of what their kids do and how the society works. They are the ones who should make these laws and draw these lines. And I'm not the only one who thinks that. A friend of ours, Mr. Scalia, recently had this to say about that at a conference in Virginia. And what happens is, Churchill had a saying about government democracy. Dictatorship's like a sleek sailboat. Runs through the water really great. But when it hits something, it sinks. Democracy is the opposite. Everybody's on a raft. Everybody's getting their feet wet, but they never sink. And that's good. That's true. Scalia is the Supreme Court justice, and he is commenting. He says, we are going to get this issue eventually. Why are we going to get this issue? The consequences of this is that whether the NSA can do the stuff it's been doing, it used to be a question for the people, will now be resolved by the branch of government, he's referring to his, who knows the least about the issues. And the judicial doesn't. They just look at the laws and they try to interpret the laws. They don't go out and examine Apple computer stores and figure out what the people are able to get or not, or Google. They should, but I mean, not they should. They probably know about it, but it's not their role. That's the role of others, and not it's the role of the legislative branch. The government knows the least about this in question. The branch that knows the least about the extent of the threat against which the wiretapping is directed. It's the judicial branch. He says, we're going to get it. Scalia also said the Constitution called for a balancing test to determine the search or seizure is reasonable, and that depends on the threat that is posed. Another question, he says, courts are ill-equipped to handle this. So, I mean, this is the thing about the Congress is they don't act unless the threat, the enemy's on the beaches. They probably don't act. But that's what we got. So anyway, is there enough individual unhappiness for a rebalancing of the rights? That's the question. There's a lot that's been proposed to settle this. By the way, it's something else. Well, that just confuses everybody. A lot has been proposed. First of all, the European Union actually has privacy as a right. They've made it a right, but they haven't enacted the law because I'm not sure they think they can enforce it. But the European Union has it, and U.S. News wrote a good article here. What we need is sustainable oversight. And it's true. What they're basically saying in this article, we need to get the American people, or at least their representatives, sufficiently on the side of what we're doing and why we're doing it and how we can do it maybe better, putting the ideas of the citizenry into this. And it needs to be sustainable, because this stuff's never going to go away. It's going to be for the rest of our lives. And it's going to continue on with this electronics and internet. We're going to be datafied. I mean, in 50 years, all our DNA and all our things that we have about our physical being is going to be in a database. It's going to be in a file. It's going to be right there. And if we want to send you to the moon, we've already established colonies on there that's got stem cells. We're going to send you there, send your database there, and in a few weeks or months, they're going to grow out of the stem cells. They're going to grow another guy. So this ain't no turning back. What's that? What's the song about the Black Eyed Peas? There ain't no hollering back. All right. Anyway, okay. Let me see. All right. That's a digital spying, and one of the things happened is Max. This just happened. Max Mosley, the head of Formula One, was caught with some illicit sex acts, and he sued Google to shut down the search engines that carry those photos. And the French court actually granted his motion. They said, we're going to shut down. Google has 5 years, 5 years to take off the photos off the search engines. Well, how's that going to work out? This recently happened, but people are rising up against that. One of the things that's happened here too, the Federal Trade Commission, there's a thing called the Internet of Things. That is, they have automatic sensors on your body that tells your basic vital signs. They have thermostats. They have control of buildings that depend on things. And these are the Internet of Things. They're not people, they're machines. And so the Federal Trade Commission has said, we have opened an inquiry to hold a public workshop to address consumer privacy and security posed by the connectivity of these devices, which include your card information, your credit for medical devices. How should privacy risks be weighed against potential society benefits? That's good. That's good. Okay, and the last one. Oh yeah, Gen Y pushback. Gen Y, the 20-year-olds and 30-year-olds, they're gonna deal with this. It's gonna be good. I'm pretty optimistic they're gonna know what they're doing.